Yeah, we're live, 10:45. live, 10:45. Don't even have to walk, don't even have to drive. All of that. Good morning. Get your projects done. Project morning motivation. Time to get it done. But today we're also going to talk about cylinder heads. More specifically, what happens when the combustion chamber is bigger than the bore size. And we see this on a lot of different applications. For instance, for a small block Chevy running a 350 on a small bore 305. And for the LS crowd, it would be running something that was originally designed for a bigger bore, like a 4-inch bore LS, and running it on the smaller bore 4.8 or 5.3 liter, the 3780 bore stuff. And we see this happening a lot. And the photo that I have up in the thumbnail is a picture of the Trick Flow 215 head. And the reason I use that is because I've run that. And even though that head is designed for a bigger bore, like a 5.7 or a 6 liter, the 3890 bore, 3900 bore, and then the 4-inch bore, and you could use it on bigger bores than that. The question becomes, what happens when you do that? Well, I can tell you that I have successfully many times now run combustion chambers where the combustion chamber measured the inside diameter of the combustion chamber at its widest part, measured bigger than the bore size does. So what is the potential downside to this? The potential downside is that at least the internet level of logic will be that, well, if it overhangs, that's going to hurt flow because the flow is going to come out of the valve and hit this edge and cause turbulence and not flow as well and all that. Also, it's going to shroud the valve and reduce flow out of the valve and all of that. How much of that really happens? This is just my question here. If we have, for instance, like on these 215 heads or any of these ported heads, because this also, and we'll talk about, they've actually done this quite often on factory applications as well. So we know that they do that, and we know that they would have tested this, and they know whether or not it works actually, because on the 215 head, like I've run on 4.8s and 5.3s, I've run the 205 airflow head, I've run 215s, I've run 220s, the ASCAS 220s, which all work very well. I've run, and the other thing to think about is even from the factory, we see that they ran LS6 heads, 243s, 799s on factory small bore motors. They had that head actually came on 5.3s. I don't know if it came on 4.8s. But it definitely came on 5.3s, the L33 that I have as a perfect example. Other applications, LC9s and things, they use those. And we know that combustion chamber, because I've measured it when we did the big cylinder head test, when we compared the 706 and 799 and 317 and 241, which is the LS1 head, when we compared all of those heads on the same small bore 5.3 liter, we saw that the cylinder head in that test, the 706, where the cylinder head bore matched the bore size of the motor, that when those two matched, it seemed to work pretty well. Although we can't attribute the fact that head worked solely to that. In fact, I don't know that that's actually, or how much of a player that actually is. But those two things happened simultaneously. So we can, you get to correlate as much of the change in power as you want to that particular thing. There were a lot of changes between the different cylinder heads. So in addition to the actual chamber size, and by that I mean the inside diameter of that, having it overhang the bore size. We also had in that back-to-back head test with like a 706 and a 799 or a 317, we also have a chamber volume change. So we have a size and we have volume. So we have a compression change, we have a valve size change, we have a port volume change. So we have all kinds of things that even if we just had one of those things, it would be nice. And then we could attribute whatever difference we saw to that thing. But now we have to attribute some kind of change in power to 5 or 6 different things. And then, and are they all equally weighted, or some worth more than others? Right now, we're just talking about the overhang. And I can tell you, having run some of the most powerful combinations, NA combinations I put together with 5.3s, have been from cylinder heads that overhang the bore size. So the 215 heads work very well. Those were one of the combinations that I was able to make, 500 or more NA horsepower out of a 5.3 liter with a stock bottom end. So we're limited in And none of those 5.3s that I've run where we've made 500 horsepower, none of them have been flat top versions. I haven't done that with, and that might be something that I look to do on the L33 to see how much NA power we can make, because I've never run one with a flat top. Obviously, we have run 4.8s with flat tops, but having lower compression with the LM7 style piston, the dish piston, but putting heads, cam, and intake manifold on there, we normally run it with headers and stuff. But putting good heads on there, putting a good camshaft, a camshaft that will fit available piston to valve clearance, and then a good intake manifold, we can get over 500. And we did that with a 205 trick flow head. We did it with a 215 trick flow head. And we did it with they were all trick flow heads. And we did it with a 220 as cast head on when I ran those heads on the 5.3 that we did the Big Bang nitrous setup on it with a tunnel ram and a big Brian Tooley camshaft on that. And so that made over 500, but all of those did that. So the question really is, and this will be our poll, I guess, for today. So if the combustion chamber inside diameter of the cylinder head write out my poll. If the inside diameter of the combustion chamber is bigger than the bore size, does it hurt power? So that will be see what our poll thinks of that. That will be our question for today for the poll. So if that combustion chamber overhangs the bore size, does that hurt power? So, or do you have to exactly match that? Is it better maybe that the bore size would be bigger than the combustion chamber? Will that help? Or does an exact match essentially, does port matching the combustion chamber to the cylinder bore, is that like the optimal way to go? Because here's the other thing to think about. We all would want that to be the case. I mean, especially if you're a little so what's a good word? I don't want to use that. Obsessive compulsive is probably a better term. If you're obsessive compulsive, obviously you want to port match everything. It's got to be a perfect transition. You want all those to be the same. But here's the other thing to think about besides that. So we've talked about those kinds of things like port matching. Everything's got to be port matched. Yeah, but if you port match it, it doesn't gain any power. Does it really have to be port matched? The answer is no. I know you want it to be, and I know it'll make you feel better, make you sleep at night, but it doesn't have to be if it doesn't gain power. And port matching doesn't always gain power, because I've tested it many times where it didn't gain power. But on the combustion chamber, if it's not ideally sized, if the combustion chamber inside diameter overhangs the bore size, and let's say our combination, our 5.3 combination with the bigger head, let's say it's making 450 horsepower. And we have a cylinder head that flows 300 CFM. Does that even matter? If we have an overabundance of head flow, which is normally the case with an LS application, very rarely are we, because whenever I build these combinations, like when I build these 500 horsepower combinations, they all have 600 horsepower cylinder heads on them, or 600 horsepower or more. A lot of times they flow more than 300 CFM. So they have enough power to support way more than the power that we're making. And that's normally the case. Not very often do I put together a combination where I go, you know what? We now need to see what's the most power that I could possibly make with a stock head. That kind of thing has happened in the past, not because I was looking for that, usually because I take a combination that we want to test cylinder heads on that are ported, that work really well. So we want to have a good combination to test those on. So when I tested all of the LS Cathedral ports or all the LS Rec ports or all the LS7 heads. We wanted to make sure that we had a really good motor. And then essentially what we're doing is detuning it by putting the stock head on there. And so in those instances, when you do that, you usually maximize the power potential of the stock head. So for instance, if we have a stock head that flows 250 CFM and we make more than 500 horsepower with it, because we really have a 600 horsepower combination and we're restricting it with the stock cylinder head, that's a perfect example of that. We did that on the LS. And the stock LS3 head, which flows a lot, it flowed 315 CFM, and we made 650 plus horsepower with it. And we did that because we put it on a really big motor that needed a lot of airflow. And so the draw on the ports now is much greater than it is, for instance, as an example, when we flow it on the engine dyno, on the airflow bench. But the other thing is the number on the airflow bench is not an exact duplication of what's happening dynamically not what's happening dynamically in the motor. So we don't need to ask questions like 15 times on this channel. So later. So that's also something to think about. But usually there's a fairly good correlation between the amount of airflow that you see on a flow bench when you flow something, and then the amount of power potential that kind of flow will support. Obviously, assuming you're using the lift where you're testing it, that camshaft is suitable and all that stuff. So that's what happens with cylinder heads. So if we have a cylinder head that we put on there that flows way more than we need, is that an issue? Would that be more of an issue when we have a cylinder head that's just eking by? These are all good questions. But it shows us that we need to look a little deeper than just the first question. Oh, does having that bore size hurt it? Well, maybe it would as an absolute thing. Maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe it does all the time. Usually somewhere in between those. And that's why we ask the other questions. Well, what's the application? It's like somebody asking, what's the best camshaft? Well, what are you trying to do? Let's hone in on your definition of, if you don't have one, what your definition should be of your ideal camshaft, because then we could try to optimize the cam for what you're trying to do. And that will give you the cam that you want, which may or may not be the same cam that everybody else wants. So lots of good stuff going on. So what are you guys doing? My son plays soccer, so we're watching a lot of the World Cup stuff. We want to see if I want to see two things. I want to see if USA does well. I'm hoping that they do well. And also I want to watch, this may be Lionel Messi's last World Cup. We'll see. I mean, he's still playing really well, but I have to think that he's been playing for a really long time. So he might be thinking that this would be his last one. So I'd like to watch it. Let's see what you guys are doing. What about 351 heads on a 302? A stock 351 head is essentially the same as a 302 head. If you get a 351 head off of a truck motor, like a late model EFI truck, it's, in terms of flow and all that, it's essentially the same as a 302 head. The 351, like a 69 351 head, which was kind of the go-to head for a long time before we had a lot of other stuff to choose from, it still works in there. And since both of those are 4-inch bore anyway, there's not going to be a big change there. Richard, did you ever end up doing an aluminum versus plastic intake video? I've run aluminum and plastic intake videos in comparisons in all of the ones that I've done. All of the intake videos have both of those included. Boss 302 is good. Semi-spherically opposed. LS4 also has 243 heads. They just the LS4 can get by with almost any kind of cylinder head. I don't know why they put 243 heads on that when they put the intake manifold on there that they put on there. Yep, hit the thumbs up. Avoiding turkey leftovers. Turkey leftovers are good though. We also had prime rib, which is a really good leftover to have. Yeah, Dean, pick the right side. Well, this looks like it's kind of going 50-50-ish anyway, so I don't know. It's going to be hard for you to be on the wrong side. If the idea of the combustion chamber is bigger than the bore size, does this hurt power? 57% are saying yes, and 43% are saying no. What will cause a 4.6 to keep blowing the O-ring on number 8 cylinder? What O-ring do you have? Are you O-ringing the cylinder head? So are you using like 1,000,000 pounds of boost? And what is the timing and all that stuff? Oh, an injector O-ring? Are you damaging it when you put it in? Is it too small? These are all things that I would look at. Is it like when you put it in, does the O-ring groove have sometimes they have sharp edges on, so when you put it in, it tears the O-ring? That happens. If the injector size is wrong, that happens. GT500 had overhangs, the earlier 3552 bore engines. Anyone relieve the top of the cylinders anymore? Pretty common when we put 351 heads on a W. The 396 I'm putting together is like that. And then I want to put rec port heads on a small bore 4.8 or 5.3, and we'll do that on those as well. I would think it would cause knock while lowering compression. Probably losing quench. It's going to be better, more air to breathe. Think about pre-cups on an IDI diesel. They hurt power, but they were extremely tiny holes. As an old school prototype machinist, port matching less my brain obsessed on something else. That's it. That happens. It's only a serious loss at the track. If it affects the track time, it will be able to monitor that on the dyno too. There would have to be a power loss if there's a loss at the track. Can you use the old 267 small block Chevy with aftermarket heads? I have a 3.8 liter, 3-inch stroke. I need to rebuild. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen one of those or put one of those together. But I think you'd have too much overhang maybe on that one. Eric, why not Gardner reported a set of 709s? You mean 706s? You got 300 CFM. That's pretty common. The total engine airflow stuff that we have run way back when Brian was there, and I mean obviously even now, but that's over 300 CFM. They put bigger valves in that stuff. Well, if this is 100 thousandths either side of TDC, it would look to the combustion like you just have a larger dish piston. I don't think it would have an enormous effect on power. Let's see. I'm scrolling back. Why does it go so far? You need to go rebuild some 862 heads. Are you doing a razor blade rebuild on them? Engine degreaser at the self-serve car wash. I've done that. It works good. Squish area can help prevent detonation. Yeah, but the area that I'm talking about is not going to affect quench. Canada versus Croatia. We watched the Denmark versus France. It was good. Finish up the fuel system on the Chevelle. Curious if you plan to test the LSXHR intake manifold. I ran the prototype version of that way back. The carbon PTR or PT, one of those, which is essentially that intake manifold. And the one that I ran was even adjustable, so we played with that. Look at the LS3 intake video on the EFI stuff, and that intake is there. Won't you be shrouding your valves by virtue of a smaller bore? Well, but that's the question. That's what we were talking about. Is that going to make a difference? How much is it? And if it is some, how much of a difference is it going to make? Eric's trying to fine tune the 125 pit bike. Stuck indoors fighting COVID. That's not good. Alex, you got a 350. What do you mean by that? Like a 350 small block Chevy? Then you can't have the Truck Norris cam or the Sloppy Stage 2 cam. But if you have an LS, you can use those camshafts. And if you have an LS and you want to choose between those two, take a look at the video that I have up comparing those two exactly and just pick the power curve that you want. Have you checked out the Promax small bore LS3? I have not. I didn't know that they did that. Cutting the rear quarter off my 69, doing a complete rear half resto. Nice. Is it, Paul, is it because it's rusty or are you tubbing it? What are you doing? Boss 302 heads on a 289. The Boss heads will go on it because the 289 is going to still be a 4-inch bore. 1970 Cadillac 472. The oil pressure doesn't want to rise up to the cylinder heads. Isn't there something weird about the oiling system on those? Isn't it the push rods or something? I can't remember all the Cadillac stuff that we were doing. Today's project is moving the Ranchero on the Model A out of the garage to clear space for a 7442. That's cool. 442s are awesome. A Boss 302 is very, very similar to a 351 Cleveland head, but it just has different water passages on it. And when you're putting O-rings in, make sure to lube them before you slide them in because they're much less likely to tear. This is a question of shrouding the valves. That's primarily what we're interested in. We wouldn't test this theory by running two heads. Well, we would do it with two heads. But the thing is, the problem with this is that we can't have we need to not run just two. The heads would have to have different chamber sizes, but then everything else would have to be the same. So that's problematic. That's what we were talking about earlier, is that when we've changed the cylinder head and created the situation, we've created a lot of other variables that we change. Richard, I have BB2 CNC ported heads on my 468. Going with the F2 Pro Charger will respond better because I have higher flowing heads. No, the blower is just going to be the amount of power that you make blown, I think, is just going to be a function of your NA power, of your starting power. Maybe if you're getting way up to the top of where you may take advantage of that a little bit more. But the thing is, with any kind of cylinder head that you would have on there that would make the same power as those heads, it's going to be big enough to flow what you're flowing from that Pro Charger. Mass makes a small chamber. I knew that, but I didn't know that Pro Comp or Speedmaster does. Turkey on a pellet grill turned out awesome. Nice. Injected with garlic. That sounds good. Inject garlic and herb seasoning with a Holly fuel pump, a grease gun needle. Is there much power difference between a small CC injector tuned with a long pulse width and a big injector with a short pulse? If the air fuel is the same, I don't know that you'd see a difference. It seems to me part of the flame front would hit the top of the deck and want to redirect up toward the valves. Let's see. Man, I'm not scrolling fast enough. Richard, we should try to test injectors at 100% duty cycle. I do a lot. We run them at 100% duty cycle quite often, and we always, I always flow test them at 100% duty cycle. A die grinder with a polishing disc, if it's used carefully, is so much better than a razor blade. I think you're kind of missing the point, Bill, that a lot of people don't have the tools that they need to do it correctly. Offset pins for the heads to get valves closer to the center of the bore work to a certain point. But what we're talking about is the chamber overhangs the bore on both sides. So moving it is, and now even if we moved in that direction, that's not going to do it. Belgium versus Canada. Yeah, I don't know that an LS3 head is necessary on these smaller displacement motors. Even on the 8,000 RPM motor they did, where we ran the D-stroked motor with a 4/8 crank in it, we ran it with cathedral port heads and we ran it with rec port heads. And the rec port heads flowed more than the cathedral port heads, but they didn't make any more power. Flathead forwards have combustion chambers that overhang the bore. I live in the Northeast, so there is some rust, but I'm mini tubbing it. Okay, cool. Long path from the oil pump to prime the Cadillac motor. Yeah, to prime them, I remember them talking about that it was problematic. What's your favorite Mopar engine? Right now, it's the 2.2 and 2.5 liter Dodge Omni motor. Well, my 468 with big Brodex heads like an F2 Pro Charger. Yes, every motor would like that. 426 Hemis are good. There's lots of I like all motors, so there isn't. I don't know that I've met some that I wouldn't want to do some testing on. Honda K series heads flow very well. Richard, will you ever consider testing Engine Quest big block Chevy cast iron heads? Ugh, cast iron heads are awful. But I think Westech has run some Engine Quest stuff. I think they've run a few of their LS heads. And I don't know if they've run maybe small block heads. I've never seen the big block heads there though. Have you ever run or tested ported GM TBI heads with the swirl ports? I've only run stock ones, never ported ones. Are we thinking 350 heads on 305? That's one example, but we were talking about LS stuff as well, or the big heads on the 396. If the idea of the combustion chamber is bigger than the bore size, does it hurt power? 61%. I read that silicone grease. Yeah, you just want something because if you have something that's petroleum based, it can make unless the O-rings are like Boone N or something, it tends to make those things swell and get bad. Engine Quest made good small block Chevy heads. Doug, if it's making 800 on the motor now, you're going to have some big numbers when you add that F2. Been considering getting Trick Flow 205 heads. They work really well. But again, if you're looking for sub 1,000 horsepower stuff, you don't need a ported head. a ported head or an aftermarket head. The aftermarket head really comes into play when you're running lots of power because it has a thicker deck and you're trying to make lots of power because it will flow more than a stock head. But if you can just take a 4.8 or a 5.3 and put a camshaft in, springs in it, and put a turbo on it and make 1,000 horsepower, there's no reason to spend for all the rest of the buildup stuff. Houston's in the house. I need more iron in my diet, and I can get it all at once with a set of iron big blockheads. Just lifting those things up on the flow bench is terrible. I've said 193 64cc TBI heads that perform really nicely after a bit of work. Well, everything is going to improve with every factory small block head will improve after you do porting on it. My little brother has a 426 stroker 6.1 Challenger, a 6-speed. Yeah, that would be cool. What is the cheapest power adder? Probably nitrous. Iron heads are great. They have much better heat retention to the combustion chamber and exhaust port. Is there really any value to getting heads ported? Yeah, there's a lot. GT40 heads, I don't know that I would spend money on getting them professionally ported. You could just do work yourself and make them better. But an aftermarket head is going to be better than the GT40 head. What happens if you put LS3 heads on LS7 block? Would you lose power? If you put stock ones on there, you probably would lose power. Camaro, my 3.3 Gen 2 LT4 put down 460 wheel horsepower on E50. Nice. Would you run 20cc or 4cc pistons in a turbo 408? What it would depend on what you're trying to do and what kind of octane fuel you're using. And Richard, have you had any experience with line-to-line piston skirt coating? No, the skirt coatings are a good idea. A lot of piston manufacturers are using that. Even the OEMs are using that, so it is beneficial. I've never used that particular one. Richard, I know you don't know me at all. I need help. I built a 6-liter LS with a Holley mid-rise intake manifold and a BTR Stage 3 twin turbo cam. Who I got it from put it together and didn't realize it had a crack. What was cracked in it? The only good thing about 3.8 liter Buick iron heads is that they weigh less than iron V8 heads. Yeah, that's right. I did learn a lesson with self-porting that the exhaust chamber not to take too much material out. Yeah, Nicole, you need to let us know what you're talking about. Did something crack? What cracked? Did the head crack, the block crack, the piston, the intake manifold? And then the next question is, once we know what it is, why did it crack? Watched the 5-liter HO XC272 cam video the other day. Great tech on it for a similar model, which your first choice in aftermarket small block forward heads. I would pick an AFR over a Pro Max. Although if you were doing it for cost, you might consider that. Because the thing is, you should look at, if you're looking at an absolute thing and you want to get the best head you can get, then you get the one that flows the most. And not surprisingly, that's also going to cost the most. But do you need that? Like we're talking about, if you have a 300 CFM head, do you need that to make your 500 horsepower? Probably not. It's 60 degrees outside. It's nice here too. Did we find out where the crack was? Has anyone tested ported versions of the 175 heads on a Chevy Fiat 305 with a valve size make it pointless, even though it's ported to? No, it won't make it ported. You could definitely improve the flow rate quite a bit, even with a stock valve size. That's one thing that we wanted to try on the 305 that I had way back, but that actually ended up going in a car. So we'll go to live chat. Rex, thank you very much. So did we find out? Did we ever find out? I'm scrolling. I changed it from top chat to live chat. It spins the wrong way. We got 2 more minutes. We have to do a short morning one, and then I'll come back later tonight. Got another video I'm working on. Got to take Milo for a walk. Turbo Sentra made 260 wheel horsepower at 5,500 and 18 pounds. Good. Is that on pump gas? What did you do it on? Rex, is he dancing to the intro music? Talking about putting 823s on a 4.8. Probably not a 4.8. Probably do it on a 5.3. But that's not specifically what this poll is about. But I do plan on doing that. It is. It's my dance. It's my jams. Nice Area 27 racetrack here. Jacques Villeneuve of the 1995 Indy 505 part of it, the 500. Milo does want to get some squirrels. What's the max horsepower you can get with the 142 blower? I don't know. If you put it on something that's big enough that would actually create vacuum in the blower. So if you put it on a 900 horsepower NA motor, maybe you could do that. I've seen mildly ported Engine Quest conventional big block Chevy cast iron heads flow 430. That seems like a lot. The 823 heads need a 4-inch bore. They do, but that's why we want to make it work on the smaller one. I'm gonna notch the bore like they do to put it on the smaller bore. We'll notch the bore, which this is just a gee whiz kind of thing, because that motor doesn't need that cylinder head. That cylinder head is already too much for an LS3, let alone a 5.3. But we just want to put it on there and show people how you would do it if you wanted to do it. So we'll notch the bore in the same way that other OEMs have done, but like on this 396 that I have, it has the big rec port, big block heads on the 375 horse 396, and it has a small bore. So they notch the bore from the factory. And so we can do that to the 5.3 also, probably a plunge cut or something. Small block 350 Chevy truck engine. How much turbo boost on a cyc engine to be safe with? It depends. If you have everything right, you should be able to run 7 pounds on it without any problem, as long as the air feels right and the timing is right and you have it intercooled and stuff, and then maybe more. But you have to start worrying about ring gap on there if you have stock ring gap. Do cams have a limit on compression ratio, or is it just spring pressure? No, the cams won't care about the compression ratio. I think that maybe the thing that you're thinking about is the camshaft is one of the things working with static compression, and then the cam timing determines dynamic compression. And then the spring rate needs to be adjusted for your desired lift that the cam is providing, and then also the RPM. How much will you have to notch the cylinder? I don't know. I need to see what the overhang is. I haven't clayed it yet to see where the overhang is. Do short tube headers provide enough of a gain to be worth it over stock manifolds? No. They are lighter, so you get some of that, but I've never seen shorty headers yet that gained enough power that I would think, oh, that's a good idea to buy whatever the shorty headers cost. Wrenching with David, limit is too little spring pressure. Not enough spring pressure is a very common thing with cam swaps, and it will definitely stop the fun. So it'll rev up and then go and get all unhappy. Any big block Chevy tunnel rams? I have a big block Chevy tunnel ram that's an Edelbrock, but it's fairly specific. And I even have the beginnings of a new upper EFI intake manifold that I was making for it. I didn't finish it, but then I decided to do something else. Richard L3 heads on a 4.8 or 5.3. It will hit the deck. That's why we're going to notch the deck. We're going to notch it for valve clearance. It's about 8 wheel horsepower on a 5.3 with shorties compared to a stock exhaust manifold. We didn't see that on the engine dyno. We didn't see anywhere near that. I put shorty headers on my 2010 Avalanche looking for increased towing power. That's the thing. A shorty header won't do that. A shorty header compared to a stock exhaust manifold is not going to gain low speed power. It's a common misconception. Long tube headers will gain low speed power much more than either one of the other two. But short primary length headers do not gain low speed power in the same way that an intake manifold with short runners also doesn't gain low speed power. Both for the fire ring. So I'm going to close out our poll here at 60% saying yes. If the chamber is too big, it will hurt power. I feel pretty confident, semi-confident, that putting the 823 heads on a 5.3 is not going to produce the desired outcome. But I think people will like seeing it happen. By the way, out there, I need a set of 823 heads. I need a set of factory Recport heads if anybody has any. So, Dean, your conspiracy is that it's both flat and round? Dan, thank you very much. Dan, did you have a question? I've tested shorty headers a lot on 5 liters and lots of LS stuff, lots of small block Chevy stuff, and the small block Ford stuff. And I just have never seen any kind of like serious power game. Like we tested them on the Coyotes too, and the same thing there. We just didn't really see anything compared to the stock exhaust manifolds. And I think the later stock exhaust manifolds are, if anything, are even better than the older stuff used to be. Just keep answering my question without me asking. I'm using the Jedi mind trick. See you later today, but I'm going to a death metal show in Chicago. So who's playing? I know, Dean. Don't worry. I won't spread that around. And you have a cheap tunnel around for a small block Chevy. I don't think I have any more of those Wyans that we ran so often on the small blocks. Maybe with a full exhaust. See, I think that with a full exhaust, we would be less likely to see a difference. But you know, it'd be. I'm all for trying it. I've done lots of on the 5 liters way back in the day. We did, you know, because everybody wanted when the equal length shorties headers came out. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Like, no, that's not the thing. It doesn't really gain any power, but it does burn all the plug wires. So it's suboptimal, as they say. Is there a formula for knowing primary length? Yes, it's going to be in the 34-ish range is a really good place to start. Off topic, but do you have any advice for tuning with toluene? No, I've never run that. I don't know if Professional Products does. Look also on the Speedmaster deal. They may have one. Richard, is a stock LT1 intake manifold considered short runner? Yes, definitely. That's why it loses so much low speed power compared to a tune port manifold. Have I ever tested the Coach rotary valve engine? No, I remember seeing that many times at SEMA. We were always disappointed that it was kind of more of a display thing. I did have a long technical discussion with Billy Godbold about that, and he's pretty convinced that that's not going to work. It's like my Kiwi theory of Earth. Let's see. Did he tell me who he was going to see? Oh, Amon Armath cattle decapitation carcass and obituary. Wow. Do you have any plans to test a rover? I think I've only seen one of those in the wrecking yard. Four-cylinder stuff, a lot of times guys will go with tri-wide designs. I don't have any tuning experience with any of the factory style ECUs. Equal length headers do look cooler though. But if you listen to David Vizard, he has, I guess, testing that shows that unequal length is really the way to go. Does toluene go bad? I don't think it could be stored indefinitely, right? It's good. It's definitely going to outgas. But what is it sealed in? I'm putting a BTR Stage 3 cam in a stock LS1. Well, you're going to do springs too, right? And then if your motor has a lot of miles on it, I would check maybe doing a trunnion upgrade on the rockers. Richard, a while back, you did a 4.8, 5.3, ported 706s, 224. Both were, yeah, they were like 470 or 480 on those with the 224 cam. If you feel about the top end on 6-liter, it'll work fine. I think that the cam's a little, if you're trying to make the most power, that cam's a little small on a 6-liter. I would put something that has, try to use all of the available piston to valve clearance if you're trying to make lots of power. But I have that kind of combination, but with a 231 cam on 6-liters also. Do you think there'll be a newer mass-produced GM motor that will compete with the LS platform? Well, the LT is going to be the next thing. That'd be the next thing that you find in the wrecking yard. Although I still don't think that that's going to be to the performance world what the LS was, because I just don't think people will deal with direct injection. They won't take to that nearly as well as they did with just normal fuel injection. It's one of those metal rectangular cans with a screw-on cap. Yeah. I'm an enormous fan of 180-degree headers. They do sound nice. Dean David's wrong, I guess. Nobody said that. At least I didn't say that. I just said that he has a test where he's showing that that's the way to go. Richard, have you ever done a test on L83 with heads and cam? Only the stuff that Brian Tooley did. I haven't done ported heads on those. We have done cam tests with them, but Brian has an L83 that's making like mid fives or something with heads and cam on it. So it's pretty impressive. Are the Ford legendary high port 240 heads like the trick flow heads, the trick flow high ports? Those things make good power. I stand corrected. Stock engine Quest big block Chevy heads flow 360 CFM. David Vizard port to flowed 440 CFM. That's still a lot. The Summit Pro LS cams work good. They would work good on that 6-liter. I have tests up on their stage 4 cam that we ran. I think we ran it on an L92 though. I don't know if I ran it on a 6-liter, but it's just going to be down a little bit on the 6-liter compared to the 6.2. No downside to big head and mild cam upgrade. I don't think that what we're going to see if we put those rec port heads on a 5.3 is we're going to see a big loss in low speed power. And I just don't know that we're ever going to gain enough with that head to take advantage of that. Motor is just not going to take advantage of that head. So it'll be more of a trade-off than it is on a 6-liter, but that's why we're going to try it. We'll see. One more minute. New flat top pistons will give up to 13.4 to 1 compression. Dean, your engineering team measured earth density. Did you do a bore? Did you take a core sample all the way through the earth? Come on, if you're going to do it, do your testing properly. And don't touch the stuff near the middle. The core sample that you get near the middle, that's still going to be warm. I saw a movie where they jump started the Earth with nuclear weapons because the core stopped spinning. Do you have any step-by-step boost tuning guide videos for both turbo and supercharger where you start from scratch and work through the fuel and timing? No, I don't do that. Or I don't have any of those. Yeah, the core. The movie was hilarious when the FBI raided the guy's apartment. He's putting all his discs in the toaster and stuff. Yeah, that was awesome. I do want to do the 300, the Ford 300. My problem is that if I did a tuning video on how to get it started or whatever, it would be with a Holly. It wouldn't be with a factory ECU because I don't do that. 820 one heads. Yeah, those are the same. That's right. Rockwell swapped the Earth. it was a documentary. I like the laser. And I like the unobtainium alloy outer shell that conducted heat energy into energy. Stronger and faster and more powerful with the more pressure and the more temperature. That'd be a neat trick. Can't find anything about an 823 head for a big block Chevy. I don't think it's going to fit on there. Yep. Freaking big lasers. That's right. And then if you could put them on the shark heads, then you'd be all set. Freaking laser beams. The core machine did have reverse pistons in it. It must have. No, I have the 396 heads. I'm looking for 823 LS heads, the Recport LS heads. I was going to ask about the 4300 with power adders. If we run a 300 or when I run a 300, it will definitely get boost on it, just like all of these things do. Yep. Give me some sharks with freaking laser beams inside a hollow volcano. It's a perfect place to have your laboratory, your secret henchman hideout. Floyd, there's no answer to that. Are valve springs necessary when doing a cam swap? There are cams that you can put in, like the BTR NSR cam that I put in, no springs required, where you can use it with stock springs. Otherwise, you have to change the springs because the springs will coil bind if you have too much lift on them, and then you'll definitely damage your motor. So springs are, on almost any cam swap, springs are required. I know a guy doing a traditional small block Chevy firing order cam swap on an LS. Why would he want to do that? Does rod ratio affect higher RPM power? I don't think it does. How much of an advantage is there to direct injection? All the OEMs seem to think that it's good for what they're trying to do. Yeah, Anthony, you can swap your 706s for 862s, not 826s. Easy breezy lemon squeezy. Do you know how many notorious henchmen I've destroyed? He's doing it for the guy swapping L's in older vehicles. Does he want it to sound particularly like a small block or something? Heavy metal. If you have an IROC, you have to be into heavy metal, right? You got to. And on that note, it's time to go. I was going to only be here like for half an hour or something. It's just so much stuff to do. Stop taking my time. I will see you guys all tonight. Have a good day. Get your projects done. And, peace be with you. Pow. Pow. Milo.